Good evening. I want to thank you all so much for coming tonight and to our City Budget 101 workshop, and thank you for taking a real interest in the city budget process. And you know, it's kind of normal to just say thank you at the beginning of every meeting for people showing up, but I want to say a little more about that thank you, which is that coming tonight means that you're making a special commitment, which is what we're looking for in our citizens, of really understanding how city government works and then jumping in and kind of taking part in it. So we're really excited to see, I mean, Santa Cruz doesn't have a shortage of people who are interested in government, but and in the local politics, but we don't always have this kind of interest where people are saying, I'm going to really dig in, get the background information so that I can be a really informed participant in the process. So I just really want to thank you all for being here. A quick introduction. Why have we invited you here tonight? We want your, as I think is obvious, we want your input and your ideas as we make decisions about our city budget. And we figure that you'll make even better suggestions and come up with even better ideas if you have a good fundamental understanding of how our city budget works. For instance, we're going to talk tonight about where the dollars come from in our city budget, how they're spent, what rules and laws shape and limit the city's options, how our budget has changed over time, how outside forces, especially the state government, have created and continue to create challenges for our city budget. We're going to talk about what the city council and city staff have already proposed to shape the budget for this coming fiscal year, which starts in July. We're going to talk about how the budget making process itself works, including how you all can continue to weigh in as the city council continues the consideration around the budget over the next 6 weeks. And last, we'll tell you a little bit about how the budget process is changing in the year ahead in a way that we hope will engage you even more and have just create more community involvement and align the budget itself even better with our community's overall goals. So, quick introductions. Our primary resource people tonight are our city manager, Martine Bernal, who oversees and manages our entire City of Santa Cruz operation, and our city finance director, Jack Dilles, who knows our city budget and our city finances better than anyone I can think of. So with that, Jack, I think you're going to start off with a review of our city financial structure and a review of where the dollars come from.
I'll start out first by telling you a little bit about the city funds. And city finance is a little bit different than finances in private enterprise or your home finances because we structure our city finances in funds. And literally we have many funds. Each fund separately accounts for the revenues and expenditures devoted to a particular program. Often this is mandated by the law. We're required to have a separate fund. And so we account for the revenues in a certain fund because we have to spend them for certain purposes in that fund. The general fund, which is our key operating fund, funds many of the primary activities that government provides locally: police, fire, recreation, much of public works, community development and planning, and various administrative activities. The general fund, by definition, is the fund that is left over after all the special funds are set up. Again, each special fund is set up either as a matter of city council policy or a matter of law. And so besides the general fund, and I should point out, we'll talk more about this, the general fund is financed primarily with taxes. That's the primary source for the general fund, taxes that all of the residents and businesses pay in Santa Cruz. The water fund is a self-supporting enterprise fund, and this accounts for all the revenues and expenditures related to the water utility operation. So those water fees can only be used for water activities. Oops. Similarly, the wastewater fund accounts for all the revenues and expenditures associated with the wastewater, with the sewer enterprise activity. And the refuse fund, the same thing. We all pay for the refuse enterprise through customer service charges, and you'll typically see a bill each month covering water, wastewater, and refuse for businesses and for residences. The Stormwater Fund is another self-supporting enterprise fund. There's a fee that property owners in the city pay, and that goes to take care of a lot of the mandated anti-pollution activities that the state and federal governments require us to carry out. Associated with stormwater, we also have a tax that the voters approved several years ago for called Measure E, which had to do with the Clean River, Beaches, and Ocean tax. And again, property owners pay that tax, and that helps keep our waterways and beaches pollution-free. The golf course, for many years, we treated as a self-supporting enterprise, and that worked just fine. Nationally, since golf activities have dropped and the economy has suffered, golf in general has struggled, and we're no exception to that. So our local DeLaveaga golf course has struggled with that. As a result, the city general fund has been supporting and transferring money into the golf course activities over the last few years, and we expect to do that in the near term as we look for ways to bring that more in balance, bring our revenues and expenditures more into balance. That is a little different than other enterprise funds, because usually recreation activities are considered part of the general fund, or at least supported by it. There are many municipal golf courses that are independent, but I think they're all struggling right now. So that's been a focus of the city council and staff to try and to deal with some of the financial issues associated with the golf course. And of course, redevelopment. Redevelopment is financed with a portion of the property tax dollar that all the property taxpayers pay businesses and residences in the city. And redevelopment, I'll talk more about how that works later, but essentially the property tax dollars given to redevelopment are supposed to cure blight, both economic and physical, and then 20% of the money collected is required to go towards affordable housing programs. And you may have heard recently that the state California is trying to eliminate redevelopment, which I think is too bad, because that's one of the few portions of our taxes that we get to keep locally. We raise it locally, and we get to keep it locally and spend it locally on local programs. And our general fund normally has about a $70 million budget for next year. This shows you, however, how about $55 million of that is split up. And we're focusing on discretionary general revenues, because that's the portion of the revenues that we collect for the general fund from taxes. That's the portion that the city council has discretion over, how to spend that money, how to set the priorities. It excludes about $15 million in monies that are collected that have to be used on certain purposes. They're non-discretionary. Things like fees or grants or revenues that if we didn't collect them, we wouldn't be able to spend them on the associated activities. So again, these are the discretionary revenues or taxes. And you can see that property taxes make up about $14 million. That's the green part of the pie, followed by sales taxes, about $13 million in blue, and utility usage taxes at $10 million. So the three of those make up the bulk of the general fund discretionary revenues. In addition to that, we have a variety of other taxes and monies that are discretionary. Things like transit occupancy taxes, otherwise known as hotel taxes, investment returns, admission taxes, a parking lot tax, franchise taxes, a whole variety of taxes. And again, the city council has discretion over this amount of money in terms of making decisions about the core activities associated with the city of Santa Cruz general fund. We'll talk a little bit about some of the specific taxes. Again, property taxes. Now you noticed maybe that I mentioned that property taxes on the pie were $14 million. I'm only showing, this only gets to about $10 million. And I'm showing that this way because I'm excluding a portion of the property tax that the state of California a number of years ago took away vehicle license fees from cities, and cities got together and raised a ruckus about that, and basically got the state to replace the lost vehicle license fees with additional property taxes. And I've excluded that portion just to be able to show the trend on property taxes. But that does add about $4 million to our property tax pie. So here you can see that property taxes over time have been very steady, very predictable, very stable for the city, and I like stable taxes. Under Proposition 13, when we had our property values increasing in value for many years, property tax growth was limited to only 2% a year. So what happened was that property values got much higher than assessed values, and the county assessor bases your property taxes on your assessed value. So that when property values have fallen, and they have fallen significantly, but less so in the city of Santa Cruz than most other places, there was a cushion between property values and assessed values. So what happened was even when property values came down, our assessed values still stayed pretty stable, and we've managed to stay relatively flat for property taxes as a result. You can see the drop that we did have is really associated not with secured property taxes, but with unsecured and other, not the core property taxes. The core property taxes have dropped very, very little, and we're projecting next year they'll go up by 1%. And I'm happy to say that. That's not necessarily keeping up with a lot of our increasing expenditures, but I'm happy that we have at least some stability now and some slow growth. And as you know, property taxes, you pay 1% of the assessed value you pay on your property taxes each year. And that City of Santa Cruz gets about 18% of that property taxes that you pay comes to the city.
18?
Yes?
So the other 82 goes to the state?
Goes to state for schools, goes to various other entities, but schools certainly make up a large amount of that. There's also a significant part of it that is given back to the state. I think you'll hear a little bit more about that later, but we receive less of the tax dollars than we used to. On sales taxes, they're much more volatile. They are completely dependent upon what's happening in the economy, and you can see they've gone up and down over the years. There are two shades of color to this bar chart because the voters approved certain additional sales taxes a number of years ago, and so the white part of the bar are the additional taxes local voters approved. The darker part of the bar is the standard 1 cent tax that all cities in California get as part of the property tax dollars. So again, we're seeing slow growth right now, which I'm happy to see. And part of that, of course, has been the volatility associated with gasoline sales and the sales taxes on those. But even if you look beyond that, there's still a slight increase in our sales tax dollars, so that's a good thing. Utility users taxes are the most stable, I believe, of our taxes, and that's because we all pay for utilities. We all need our utilities, and there's always demand for them. The increase you're seeing in the, I should point out all these bars have, the budget year is the far right. So next year, 2011-12, is the far right bar. The one next to it is the current fiscal year ending in June. Our fiscal year is July to June. So in the current fiscal year, we're seeing an increase of about $400,000 associated with the fact that the voters last November approved the increase in the utility users tax. And that added another $1.2 million, or total $1.6 million a year as of next year, once we have our first full year with the higher tax. So that's a welcome addition to the city finances, and I know we're very appreciative to the community for voting that tax in. The transit occupancy tax has been doing very well compared to other communities. So this is relatively flat, but most cities and most areas have seen a real drop and decline in hotel taxes. I attribute the flatness and the growth that we have to the fact that this is more of a staycation community and the fact that we're not dependent upon business travel, we're more dependent upon tourist travel. Communities like San Jose that are very dependent on business travel have seen a very strong drop in their hotel taxes. So it's a good thing for us that we have the tourist industry, and it allows us to keep what we have in this in terms of our tax base for hotel taxes. We also collect many fees, and fees are basically the way that the city recovers its costs for individual services or products. And this area has been heavily regulated. There have been a number of statewide propositions that voters have approved that have placed constraints and lots of rules around our ability to collect fees as a city. And Proposition 218 and 26, I think, have been the most, have had the most effect. Proposition 26 was approved by the voters last November, statewide, and it basically said that every fee a city charges or a local community is a tax unless it meets one of the exceptions. Before I list the exceptions, the requirement of a fee is that, and it has been true for a long time, we can't make money on any fees, so we cannot charge more than the reasonable cost of providing the services. As far as exceptions, if there's a special benefit or privilege provided, such as a planning permit, that's an exception. If a government service or product like a recreation class is provided, we can charge that without calling it a tax. We can call a license or permit a fee, like a taxi permit. Also, a fee would relate to the use or entrance of city property, like green fees on the golf course, fines and penalties or late fees, development impact fees or other development fees are accepted, and finally, utility rates and assessments, although they have their own sets of constraints apart from this. So hopefully that gives you a feel for that there are lots of rules we need to follow and lots of exceptions before we can set a fee and implement it. Utility payments by customers are the primary source of revenue for the refuse, water, and wastewater utilities. And in terms of water, customers pay a readiness to serve flat fee, and they also pay a usage fee if you're a residential customer. If you're a non-residential customer, we have more of a standard rate as opposed to an accelerated rate. Accelerated rate meaning the more water you use, the higher the rate is at those upper levels of usage. That encourages, of course, water conservation, which is very important. Our wastewater customers pay flat fees each month, and the refuse customers pay various fees depending on the size of the containers or services that you receive from the refuse enterprise. Water fund brings in $22 million a year in operating revenues, wastewater fund $16 million, and the refuse enterprise $15 million. And besides those customer revenues, we also sell bonds, receive the debt proceeds for certain capital improvements we need to make to keep the enterprises doing what they need to do. And we also do our best to get grants. We'll talk a bit more about grants. Grants, we're bringing in, right now, we get about $1 million this year from federal and state, from federal grants for police and firefighters. That's going to go away in June of 2012, and that will further impact our budget. Grants, we do our best. Right now, as of the beginning of this year, there are $44 million in grants that we're actually working towards receiving. So we've been awarded those grants. We just need to spend and carry out the programs to get the grants. So that's a tremendous amount of money that covers all of our funds. Most of that is capital related, but all good purposes. And we've matched this $44 million with $4 million of local funds. So we've leveraged our monies to get grants as much as we can. There are times when we can't afford the match, but in these cases we've been able to do that, and it's a very valuable part of our finances. Redevelopment, a little bit more about redevelopment. I mentioned that it's part of the property tax pie, and the way redevelopment works, there are redevelopment agency boundaries that basically stretch along Mission Street. It's essentially the commercial sector of the community. Along Mission Street, from the edge of town all the way into town, over to Harvey West, through downtown, and out along Water and Soquel Avenue out to the city limits in the other direction. So that whole sector is part of our redevelopment agency boundaries. And the properties in those areas, property taxes go up whenever values go up or whenever new development happens. And all that generates new property taxes. So the way redevelopment works is they take a base year, and our redevelopment agency was formed in 1956. So all the growth in the redevelopment boundaries since the base year. All the increased taxes go to the redevelopment agency. And so that's what's happened. And so currently we're receiving about $12 million a year in redevelopment tax increment, but then we have to turn around under various agreements and laws and pass $7 million, that $12 million back to other jurisdictions. So we end up with about $5 million a year in redevelopment monies. I should also point out that the City Council serves as the board of the redevelopment agency. Even though the agency is a separate legal entity, they wear those hats as well and make decisions for the agency. That's it on revenue. So I'm going to start the discussion of expenditures, just show a couple brief slides, and then turn it over to our Vice Mayor and City Manager. This is another pie chart on the expenditure side. And when I mentioned earlier that we have 50, this is the entire city budget, $160 million. I mentioned our general fund is $70 million, which you can see with the yellow part of the pie. And most of the rest of the budget are the wastewater, water, and refuse enterprises, the red, blue, and green parts of that pie. So most of the city budget is made up of those four funds, and we have various other debt service, capital project, insurance funds, et cetera. But that's the size of our budget for next year. Then this slide shows you, when I showed you earlier the general fund discretionary revenues, and the fact the city receives $55 million of those, this is how the $55 million would be spent if the City Council approves the recommendations of staff in the proposed budget. Again, they have discretion over that, so this is just a proposal, but it's consistent with how we spent money in the past. You can see the police and fire budgets, the purple and red are more than 60% of the city's general fund discretionary budget. That's followed by Parks and Recreation, which is our next highest priority. And even though that's taken some real hits over the years with budget cuts, it's still clearly a high priority for the city. Followed by Public Works in the yellow, and Planning and Community Development, followed by various other purposes, like we pay $1.4 million a year to the library system under the terms of the Joint Powers Agreement with the library system. We have various administrative departments. We pay community programs, debt service, and so we have many purposes and many uses, many competing uses for the resources the city has. With that, I'll turn it over to Vice Mayor Wayne.
So this next section is going to talk a little bit more about where the money goes. I mean, Jack gave you an overview. And a lot of what you're about to see here is going to look very familiar to you already. I think you know about every slide probably that I'm going to show, except that the reason we're going through it is just to kind of remind you about kind of the huge array of things the city has to do and pay for day in and day out. And we have to deal with these every day, and we have to recognize that every one of them costs money. So the first one obviously is our public safety related. The biggest, as you saw in the pie chart, the biggest slice of the pie goes to the police department and its activities. The next biggest slice is is fire and emergency medical services. 911 is something we're all as taxpayers paying for. Maintaining your streets. We have an ongoing project. It doesn't move as fast as we'd like, but we're trying to have a program of paving the most needy streets each year. Other kinds of street improvements. This is the new roundabout down near the beach. As you know, we pick up the garbage and the recycling, and we process it up at the landfill. There's a major facility there, lots of people working to sort it, and then this is the stuff that we can't recycle goes here. We also have a huge system that you barely notice, except when it's really when we have really heavy rains. Everything works, well. But once in a while, it needs some help, and so we have to maintain this system. It gets clogged, and if we didn't have it, we'd be in trouble. We keep
this.
This
Part of the general fund or the overall expenditures, right?
What we're doing here is, this is everything. I'm doing a little bit of mixing,
Okay, yeah.
because it is important, it is important to recognize that even though the general fund is the one place where there's more range of options, even within, for instance, the refuse fund, which does the recycling and the landfill and so forth, all of that is still within the city budget, and the city council has to make decisions about how to spend the money within those departments. If we're going to do more, improve our recycling program, then that's a budget decision as well. So we just wanted to give you a sense of sort of the range of these things. Yeah. Street sweeping as much as we can do, especially in busier areas of town. We have a whole parking system, downtown parking, beach area parking. There's neighborhood parking permits. We have a whole system of parking, dealing with parking. One of the most important services the city provides that we would be in real trouble without is processing all the wastewater. So we have a whole system, a sewer system, and then we have a processing facility, maintaining those the mains. We have bigger flood control projects in certain areas that we have to maintain. Traffic engineering on basically every street. We're just making sure that where there's stop signs, there needs to be stop signs and other kinds of signage, and just controlling traffic. We maintain the signs, make sure the signals are working. We have a huge park system, especially if you think about our greenbelt lands, and just maintaining and patrolling those places and operating all the different activities there. And you can see we have a huge range of kinds of park facilities, and you can see, and that's how many we have. They're all over town. Example of some of the bigger parks, and so you can imagine the maintenance involved in maintaining all of these. Neighborhood parks, of course, the greenbelt parks. We have our own Civic Auditorium. The wharf is something that the city owns. I'm not sure everyone is aware that that's something that we maintain, and we're the landlord for all the businesses out there. We have a golf course that we own. We have a huge array of recreational programs that I bet all of you have touched in some way in you or your family. We have a city council who works a little bit. Example of some of the innovations that the city takes. This year we've implemented a new parking system. And then behind the scenes of all this kind of stuff, there's things. We have a city attorney because we have contracts with zillions of people. We have laws to enforce. We have 770 employees, so we have to maintain a human resources department for all those employees. We also have an information technology system, the phones and the computers for them, and also for you, because then that creates a whole body of information that any member of the community has access to. We maintain, we have a huge amount of requirements of records to maintain, so we do all that. And then we have Jack and his staff and the city manager's office to manage this huge budget and watch where the dollars go and make sure they're spent properly. We have a planning department, which does, both building inspection. It kind of has a whole inspection division, and then also permits for any new development in town. We have a water system to operate, and that includes both getting water to our customers, treating it. We do a tremendous amount of water conservation programs, so there's just a tremendous complex operation there. We have a bicycle system that we plan and maintain. We have community programs. This is a relatively small part of the budget, but it gets a lot of attention, and this is social service programs that the city funds. We make we don't operate the library system ourselves, but we make a contribution to the city-county system. We have a whole economic development function, some of which is in the redevelopment department, but some of it's a city function. And we're doing, all these projects like the Marine Sanctuary Center, and we do all kinds of economic development activity, including business recruitment and helping businesses that are here now. And with that, well, just the last piece is the staffing.
Okay, and before I go into this, I just wanted to sort of clarify one thing with respect to, you asked a question about general fund versus other enterprise operations, and wanted to explain the reason why you tend to hear about the general fund. When you hear about the deficit, we're generally talking about the general fund and not the enterprise funds. And the main reason for that is, as Jack explained earlier, the general fund is largely supported by taxes. And taxes are, to a large extent, reliant on the economy. Also, taxes cannot be raised or increased without a vote. And so, whereas rates, for example, your refuse rates, your wastewater rates, those can be adjusted by the city council. And it does provide some additional flexibility because when you have the ability to sort of change rates, you can project out ahead and plan out ahead. So you can be a little bit more consistent with respect to how those rates are set over time and create enough fund balance and adjustments to sort of have them be sort of moderate and not so much go up and down. And the general fund, because it's more tied to the economy and it's more restrictive as far as being able to adjust the taxes, it's just much harder to project what it's going to do. And so we generally are seeing deficits in the general fund. So that's why the attention is on the general fund, because that's where the deficits are. So as far as our cost in the general fund, as Jack also pointed out in the chart, really 70%, a little over 70% of the costs in our operating budgets, particularly the general fund, are in personnel services. So we spend most of our money, 71%, is on employee cost. That's where most of the bulk of the money goes towards. So this gives you a sense of how those are broken down. And here you'll see we've broken down the different departments. And this is mostly the administrative departments and the city council. And the green bar shows what component is salaries. The purple above that is the retirement cost, and then health cost above that, and then finally other costs at the very top. And as you can see, those have been increasing, particularly the retirement and healthcare costs. And the next slide, let's see if we get this right, gives you a sense of how much we spend in the public safety department. And you can see, as was demonstrated earlier, police is by and large one of the largest, and fire are the largest expenditures. And you can see there where also the retirement costs in particular are higher proportionally in those functions as compared to the other functions. Then you've got parks here and public works and planning and community development. Okay, so budget focus, past and present. Wanted to give you a sense of kind of our expenditures, what they've been over time. And as you can see, they have, beginning in 2004, gone up, largely because of the increases to benefits. We really have not necessarily increased services. In fact, we made reductions, and if we hadn't made those reductions, these costs would have been even higher. So we've had to make adjustments just to maintain the services that we have, and even reduce the services at some point. The biggest adjustment that we made more recently was in 2010, when we had a large deficit there, and we asked all of our employee units to make reductions as well as to implement furloughs. Furloughs continued in 2011, and we're in negotiations for next year. And so, again, our budget doesn't remain static, even though, for example, this year compared to next year, we still are facing healthcare cost increases and retirement increases, and so they won't stay even. Employees are due merit increases, so we still have those in place. So, like most employers, our costs don't stay even. We're essentially trying to manage them in a way that match our expenditure base. That's really our challenge, in that, as you saw earlier in the revenue charts that Jack showed, our revenues have gone down. They're starting to come up, but they're not keeping up with our expenditure rate increases. So we're trying to make those balance out over time. So I think you want me to go on and wait for questions?
Save questions for the end.
Okay, sorry about that. We'll answer your questions. So this is just historical. So with respect to what's affected the budget as far as what our revenues could have been if it weren't for these factors. Well, first of all, as was mentioned earlier, the state. The state, well, it's these four, and I guess I have a slide for each one of these, so I'll just go through them real quick. The state has had a number of actions that reduce the ability of local governments to raise revenues, and they've taken revenues away. And certainly with the adoption of Proposition 13, that had a huge impact as far as property taxes are concerned. The cumulative impact is about $30 million since we've had property tax shifts, which is about $2 million a year. So had not been for the state, we'd be receiving an additional $2 million a year in property tax revenue. They've also shifted sales tax, and I mentioned the property taxes. So as Jack mentioned earlier, cities have responded by trying to limit the ability of the state to take away funds. They've also taken redevelopment funding, some of that redevelopment funding that Jack mentioned, some of which has already passed through to schools and to the county and other entities. They've wanted to take more of that. In fact, we just made a payment to the state a few weeks ago. I forgot what it was, 300.
Yeah, it was more like
$720,000 to the state that otherwise would have stayed locally. So that has had an impact on our budget over time, and that continues to be an issue. That's why they're interested in eliminating redevelopment, quite frankly, is so that they can keep that revenue. In addition, I mentioned that. Okay. So the other major factor is the economy. And the economy affects a number of things. Obviously, it affects the taxes that we receive, which after the 2002, when we had that recession, that's when they really started going down, started going back up in 05, 06, 07, and in 08, they went back down again, and they're starting to sort of level off. And so we've seen an overall reduction in those taxes, and they're not back to where they were in their peak in the early 2000s. So we still haven't recovered back to their peak levels. And then those affect interest earnings and investment earnings, which in turn have affected the rates that the PERS, which is the Public Employee Retirement System, charges cities. So as they've seen the economy go down and their investment returns go down, they've raised their rates in turn because they're not receiving the revenues that they need to receive in order to make the system sound. And so they pass those rates on to cities and employees. And so we've had to pay those increased costs in the retirement rates. And there's a number of reasons why PERS rates have also increased, not just that, but also the demographics and so forth. And then healthcare costs, we've seen significant increases. We're getting them 20, 15, 16%. It's not unusual levels. I serve on the board of directors of a local nonprofit, and the other day our executive director sent me an email saying we just got our new healthcare rates and they're going up 82%, which is like, I'm like, are you sure? And it was correct. So it's amazing how these rates, and we haven't experienced 82%, but it's not unusual for us to have 20% increases per year. So it's hard to keep up with those increases when our revenues are only increasing, they're flat or 1% to 2% a year. It's just a very difficult thing to maintain. Okay, just again to give you a history of reference chart here. We've done, and actually I was looking at the detail, our first set of reductions that we called phase 1. We're in phase 12 now, but in phase 1 was actually in 2002. And since then we've done, like I said, 12 sets of reductions beginning in July of 2002, and they total to about, not including kind of what we're doing now, about $25 million of reductions that we've made over the years.
$25 million a year?
No, total, when you add them all together. Back in July of '02, we started with 2 million, and the next year we did another million, and so on. Every year we've had to make reductions. The most significant really have been in the last several years. The first set of reductions really revolved around eliminating vacant positions, cutting things that we really didn't have to do, maintenance, internal kind of maintenance, building, custodial kinds of things, were some of the first set of, again, cuts to services. And the most recent sets have been reductions to services, but also we've asked employees for concessions. We've implemented furloughs, for example. Overall, we've eliminated about 100 positions total. At one point, our workforce was over 900 employees. As I mentioned earlier, now we're at 770. So we've reduced, I would say, about 20% of the general fund in terms of number of employees. About 30% of the workforce in the Parks Department. Jack mentioned earlier how public safety currently is 60% of the total general fund. When I first started back in 1997, public safety was 40% of the total general fund. So what's happened is we've cut in other areas, so that even though we've cut in police and fire, we actually reduced police positions by 15%. Even though we've cut there, the proportion has increased as far as the proportion of the general fund has decreased because we've cut more disproportionately in other programs and services, particularly parks and recreation. Again, we've asked employees for concessions in a variety of different forms, and our bargaining units have been very cooperative, and we very much appreciate what they've done to assist the city. And it's taken a variety of different forms. It first began with a deferral of contractually agreed upon COLAs, for example. We've asked them to increase their contributions to healthcare. Most recently, we've asked the bargaining units have done some flat increases. We don't have caps, as one of the questions was asked at this point. We've asked them to contribute more to retirement. Again, we've asked them to just eliminate some of these COLAs that were due. We've implemented furloughs, pretty extensive furloughs. Our work week is now for general fund employees, it's 36 hours a week as opposed to 40 hours a week. So it's in effect a 10% pay reduction on top of all these other things. So it's pretty significant. And so our strategy really has been balance, I think, in terms of addressing both the expenditure side, and also the other thing is in terms of retirement costs, we have asked for increased contributions to retirement, and we've also asked for a two-tier retirement system, which is to go to a less costly system for future employees. And our police unit, our fire unit have agreed to do that, as well as our supervisory management unit and our executive units have all agreed to do that. On the revenue side, we've done what we can there. As Jack mentioned earlier, the voters were willing to increase your taxes, and so we increased the utility user tax to address some of the revenue shortfall there. So I think we've again looked at both revenues and expenditures, tried to take a balanced approach to addressing our budget problem moving forward. What we're focusing now is trying to make more structural changes moving forward, because we recognize that as we project out, as we do our forecast, we're looking at a structural deficit problem. It's a recurring problem. So the kinds of solutions that we need to put in place have to be recurring in nature if we want to have a balanced approach moving forward. So that is our goal, and it's just not an easy thing to do. But I think we're making great strides in that regard. So despite all of these changes that we've had to go through and all these adjustments, like I said, we've had 12 sets of adjustments. We've actually been able to do quite well, and I think this is sort of the other side of the story that we don't really hear too much about. But the council has been very supportive in really maintaining very sound fiscal policies for the city. Throughout this whole period of time, we've maintained adequate reserves. We've never been in a position where we have to borrow for cash flow purposes. A lot of organizations have to do that. We've never bounced a check. Our reserves are adequate for cash flow purposes, or adequate for making our payments. They're adequate for emergency response, and that's been very good. And we've always balanced our budgets. We have to. We don't have a choice. Sometimes, it takes us a little longer. We do something at mid-year, but we always balance them, and we always maintain our cash reserves. In fact, if you look at sort of the ultimate rating, it's really what our bond rating is, which was actually recently upgraded. And our bond rating is a AA, which is quite good according to Standard & Poor's. the way they describe it, it's a very strong capacity to meet financial obligations. There's only one bond rating above that. It's a AAA, which is extremely strong capacity, and there's 10 ratings below that. There's a negative A, triple B, double B, C, triple C, double C, and C, and D. So we do quite well, and I think that's, again, an indication that we've done sound fiscal management. So when the auditors come in and the bond ratings come in and rate what we do, they give us a very good bond rating. Again, I think a lot of that credit goes to the council really making tough decisions to make the cuts, to implement what we need to implement. I think I've kind of covered this about the balanced approach and more, taking into consideration our goals and priorities as we've made all these difficult decisions. Again, public safety obviously has been a priority, and that's why you see that shift that I described earlier. I'll move real quickly. We've done other things on the revenue side. Jack mentioned leverage grant opportunities. We have $44 million in grants. That's pretty significant. So wherever we can leverage the ability to get other outside sources, we've done that. On the economic development side, the council has been very aggressive as far as trying to develop economic development, increase our tax base as well. And I already mentioned the tax measure. I think I covered this as well in terms of the expenditure side. Again, even on the expenditure side, we try to have a balanced approach. It's not all about one thing. For example, we're not trying to address our problem simply by reducing employee compensation. We want to be reasonable, fair, equitable. We've also had to make some severe or significant service level reductions. We're not putting as much into capital equipment and our infrastructure as we really should, so we've had to make some reductions there. We've also tried to increase our efficiencies by implementing technology, eliminating duplication. We just, for example, recently reduced the number of departments. We had 4 administrative departments that we consolidated into 2 to kind of reduce costs there. We continue to look at other ways to deliver services that are more cost-effective and more efficient. So it's really about providing a balanced approach to solving our problem. Okay. And now,
you want to start
we'll
this? Share this one.
Okay, budget process. So one of the major functions and responsibilities in the city's charter is for the city manager is to propose a budget. And we have a council, city manager, form of government. And again, one of the major responsibilities of the city manager is to every year, it's fiscal management overall, but every year to propose a budget for the city council to consider. And budgeting has really changed in the last few years. It used to be that you did it once a year, and what was adopted, you kind of could rely on that to occur for the year. These days, because there's so many variables out there with respect to what the state's going to do, what the economy is going to do, that it just become more of something that we do on a regular basis. We pay more attention and do more adjustments to the budget on an ongoing basis than we ever had before. So it's changed in that regard. The other thing, too, is that because we're looking at reductions. In the past, it was, well, what are we going to change? And a lot of times it's what we're going to add or what we're going to adjust. Now it's like, how are we going to find savings? How are we going to deal with the deficit? So we've had deficits every year. And so what we do is early on, we look at our projections to see where we're going to be in terms of our revenues, working with the finance department, and then project out what is going to be that. And again, in the last few years, it's really what the deficit, hoping there's not going to be one, but what is it going to be? And then how are we going to be able to address it? And then we asked all the departments to try to make as many reductions as they can, make as many adjustments as they can. It's really a team effort working with the department heads and the various staff in the different departments to identify how we're going to address the deficit. To a large extent, really, the budget has been about sustaining what we've got and trying to. So it's not, in the past we'd have departments submit proposals for additions or changes, and we just don't do really that anymore. They're really waiting to hear what do you want us to cut? How much do you want us to cut? Unfortunately, has been the way it's been. And like I said earlier, we started out with lots of positions, and we just don't have that flexibility. We don't have as many positions to cut that are vacant. We don't have as much salary savings that we achieve like we used to before. So that's not as discretionary as it used to be. Once the departments kind of get the direction as far as what the level of savings that need to be achieved, or what to propose, what kind of flexibility there is, they go through the process of submitting their budgets to the finance department. So there's various forms that they put together. They do the estimates. We look at again, how our revenues are going to do. We look at all labor agreements, what's going to come due, what's not. And again, even that arena, because we're constantly now in negotiations with our labor unions, and what might come into play and what not, we're having to make adjustments and changes there. Once all that's put in place, then this big document gets brought forward to the City Council for them to consider, and then turn it over to Don, who can talk about the council process.
Thanks. So, right, this is a metaphorical handoff, but that's in fact kind of how the process works, that Martine and his staff works for several months to put this notebook together, and then late in May, it gets delivered to every city council member, and it gets put on the city's website, and then our fund begins. What happens for us is that basically, we have right after we get it, each of the council members takes it home and stays up late at night and falls asleep trying to read through the document and understand it. But we do make our way through it, and then that prepares us for June 7th, which is a city council meeting date that we call budget hearings, and that is basically a 9-10 hour meeting all day and into the early evening, where we go through page by page through this document. We look at every department, we look at their staffing levels, we look at their expenses, we look at the revenues, and we have a chance to answer questions. We hear from members of the public on each section of the document, so you're invited, you have a chance to do that. Hold on one second, I don't want to. Oh, I'm going to digress here for a second, because this slide reminds me of one other thing. What's called the Capital Improvement Program. During the time when the city manager is developing the budget, there's also a separate side process, which is the development of the capital improvement budget. Capital improvement, just in a nutshell, is things that are material purchases of a significant nature. In other words, something like paving a street, building a bridge, upgrading a sewage treatment plant, really substantial expenditures. So part of the budget process is also to look at all those things and set priorities for those, and then those get integrated. The top picks for those activities also get integrated into the budget. So we have, as I mentioned a moment ago, we have these budget hearings. It's open process. That would be a really good time for you to participate more if you'd like to. And then that budget hearing lays the groundwork for the city council meeting on July 12th, which is when the council actually votes to adopt the budget. And there's not just a single vote, although there's one final vote that is saying, yes, this is our budget and this is what we're gonna, this is our plan for the year. We also at that time take any items, sort of smaller items in the budget where there's not consensus among the council members and the city manager about what level of spending should happen on that particular item. And that on July 12th is when we vote to say, well, we're going to go this way or that way. So that's an important part of the process too. That's where really some of the toughest decisions are made. Because frankly, a lot of the budget is fairly routine, and we are going to continue having a police department, so there's not really going to be a debate about that. But there might be a debate about whether we're going to have 96 officers or 97. So if there's an issue there, that's when it gets decided.
Dawn, can I ask you a question about that?
Could I, I'm almost done, so, and then we're going to get to questions, so hang in there just a second more. So you've now had a little bit of information tonight to help you get an overview. This notebook is available to anyone I mean, the contents of it are available online at cityofsantacruz.com, and you'll be right on the, I'm pretty sure right now we've got it on the home page. If you want to look at the draft budget, it's there, and it will be there through July 12th at least. So we encourage you to take the tools you have tonight, take a look at this document, and then between today and July 12th, you'll have several opportunities to provide the input that you might have on the budget. One is I'd really encourage you to send emails to any city council member or all of the city council. You can do that anytime. You can telephone council members. You can write letters. Our contact information is on the cityofsantacruz.com website, so I encourage that. You can also arrange individual meetings if there's a particular issue you have want to spend some time on meeting with a council member. Please arrange a meeting with your favorite council member. You can also come to the June 7th hearings and speak at those hearings. And then finally, the members of the community will have an opportunity to speak on July 12th. So you're armed and ready to go. Those are your opportunities. One final word, and then we're going to just open up completely for questions. This winter, the council held a special meeting that we have not held in 25 years, as far as I know, where we looked at the setting the primary goals for the city for the coming 3 years. And we adopted 5 goals that are very broad, but very important, I think, as well. And these are the 5 in no particular order. Enhance environmental sustainability and resources, enhance community safety, attract and retain businesses and jobs, improve and maintain the infrastructure and facilities, and achieve financial stability and sustainability. So this year is the first year that the council is going to consider the budget with this set of goals in place. And it's our intention to adopt a budget that actually reflects the priorities that are embodied in those goals. So we're on a path of trying to get more focus as we do our budgeting, but next year we're trying to do it even more. And so we want to invite you to participate even more in the process in the year ahead, because what we're going to do is review these goals in a public process. We're going to invite you to suggest revisions to those goals if you think we need them. And we're also going to create more specific objectives under each of these goals. In the long run, what we're trying to do is just have a more public engaged process where we make sure that the community's goals and the city council's goals and the spending priorities in the city budget are all lined up together. We just want to make sure that we're allocating our government dollars to achieve the things that we as a community have decided we want to accomplish. So that's our long-term vision, and we invite you to stay involved in that. And again, I invite you to participate in all those different ways that I mentioned a moment ago.